live. We're live. How excited are you, Patrick? Look at your big, dumb, handsome face. You're excited as hell. I can tell.
I'm so excited. First show back after the draft. Broncos draft was eventful, to say the least. But yeah, man, it's good to be back. It's good to see your beautiful face. Look at you, dumb, handsome.
You and I are one and the same.
You don't have a pump though, so what are we doing?
Well, I do a little bit. I kind of live with just a constant pump that we got going on. This is altitude adjustment. Let's get.
Hey, feel I'm in the mood for a switch up. I hit the function, hit the rose till I hiccup. I hit the stage and leave with money that's a sticker.
Mario Vitanzi, Patrick Chiotti, thank you all so much if you're tuning into the live stream. Otherwise, you can watch it later. Either way, you are getting the best Broncos draft content that there is available. Literally nowhere else is going to give you the information, the energy, the passion, the substance that I, myself, and me, and also Patrick to an extent, are going to give you. Make sure you follow us on Twitter at Vitanzi Therapy, at Patrick Chiotti. And if you like this really cool shirt, check this out, Pat. Where did you get that, Mario? Is that a power run play? Is that a shirt that says run the damn ball? It is. And it does. And you can find this shirt along with many others, including a Bo Nix shirt that will drop probably within the next couple days. You can see that at the altitudeadjustmentshop.com. Sorry, I said at. It's not on Twitter, okay? It's just a website. You remember websites, right? You used to go onto your browser, type them in. I don't know if people do that anymore. It's either you have an app or you don't. I don't have an app, but we have a store, and that's pretty much all we have to say about that. Let's get right into it, Patrick. First round pick. A guy that I think a lot of people figured would be drafted by the Broncos. At least he was the betting favorite to go to Denver. And the knee-jerk reaction was maybe a little bit of disappointment. So let me set the stage. A lot of Bronco fans over the last few months had really wanted this team to draft Bo Nix, but later. Trade back, get some assets, take Bo Nix. The way the draft board fall, and hearing what Sean Payton said about Bo Nix, it was clear that they were going to get their guy at 12. Now, as we were watching the draft live, as J.J. McCarthy slipped down the board, really once he got past the Giants, you kind of assume that, well, J.J. McCarthy is going to be a Bronco. They don't have to go up to 3. They don't have to go up to 4. They can go up to 7, 8, 9, 10. Go up a couple spots and take J.J. McCarthy. And so when they didn't make that deal, Patrick, your first reaction, or at least mine was, why wouldn't they just give up a 4th and a 5th and go get J.J. McCarthy? Instead, the Vikings gave up a 4th and a 5th. I think they got a 6th in return. They took J.J. McCarthy. Bo Nix goes at 12. Come to find out, Sean Payton was maybe playing a little bit of mind games with the Minnesota Vikings, caused them to want to trade up one spot to secure J.J. McCarthy, even though it turns out Bo Nix was higher on Sean Payton's board than J.J. McCarthy, than a lot of the other quarterbacks. Apparently, he was QB3 on Sean Payton's board of quarterbacks. And so, by that perspective, this is not a reach. And everything that we've heard Sean Payton say about Bo Nix ever since taking him at 12, the mental processing, everything they put him through during the process, these are the things that made me not just okay with the pick, but they made me excited about the pick. They made me excited for Bo Nix. Now, Pat, for anyone that doesn't know, you are the Oregon guy. You're a big, lifelong Duck fan.
Yep.
Bo Nix was your guy. Troy Franklin was your guy, who we're going to get to later. Yeah. What are your thoughts? Give me your immediate reaction to the Bo Nix draft pick, and then subsequently now where you're at.
So let me preface this with a couple of things. First, you said that the play on your shirt is a power run play. Mario, that is ISO. That would be
ISO, but it's you have to have a lot of power to run it. Like a lot of strength and power to be able to run it.
The call is strong eye right. That would be a 32 ISO would be the call.
Just 32 ISO. It's exactly what I said. Yeah.
Just throwing that out there. Second, when Bo Nix entered the transfer portal a couple years ago, granted, this is after his career at Auburn, where he played for 3 years, and it was lackluster. Like, the most touchdowns he threw in a season was 11. That team was kind of going on the downward trend, and he got out of a bad situation in Auburn. And when it was announced that he was transferring, and Oregon was kind of immediately connected, I prayed that he did not come to Oregon. I repeat, that he did not come to Oregon, because I saw the type.
I was not a Bo Nix fan.
I was not a Bo Nix fan, and I was very vocal about that. And he made me eat my words, and fully accept that, because he grew as a quarterback, and like Sean Payton said, he faced some adversity at Auburn, and he overcame that adversity. And then, having to transfer and go to a completely different town, like the town of Eugene, Oregon versus his home in Auburn. And then have, a new offensive coordinator, a new offensive scheme that he has to work in. For him to come in to Oregon and do the things that he did and produce the way that he produced, it was really refreshing to see. He made a lot of great decisions. His teammates absolutely raved about him. And this is a guy who just super high character individual. You're never going to hear a bad word about him from campus. I have people down there still. My sister goes to school there. She was around. Everybody loved this dude. On draft night, when Penix went at 8, that's kind of when I was like, when is this going to happen? I had received some intel earlier in that day that said Nix is the pick. It's just a matter of when, right?
Right.
So I kept that in my mind. I said, okay, we saw the run go, Williams, Daniels, May. We all saw that one coming. Penix was the curveball, right? McCarthy not going before Penix.
It's putting it lightly, Patrick.
Yeah.
That was a knuckleball. That was an eephus pitch.
So at 12, I was like, man, okay. Like, all the 5 quarterbacks are off the board. There's not a lot of room for you to do what you probably wanted to do, which was trade down. But there was all this talk about go get your guy, and we've got to trade 3 first-round picks to go get this guy, and blah blah. Like,
make sure you throw in Pat Surtain in there just to sweeten the deal.
So they draft him at 12. I'm like, okay. We had to, like, there was no other option, really. Like, if fans were going to be excited about Spencer Rattler being the starting quarterback going into week 1, yikes. That probably would not make me feel good. That would have been a long-term plan. But he's also an old.
No, you're not getting the warm tingles in your stomach with Spencer Rattler. That's more like, that would be more like indigestion.
Yeah. And hearing what Sean Payton said about their process and their evaluation of him, how prepared he was when he came in to the meetings, and giving him install as late as possible to just kind of like test him and push his limits. How far can we push this kid, and see how he responds? And he responded very well. So that kind of I look back at that moment when I said, God, please don't come to Oregon. And now I'm looking at it like, man, I'm kind of glad that he went to Oregon, because maybe he doesn't become that player, like maybe he doesn't become this type of person. Like, he has a completely different coach in Dan Lanning, who's a lot younger and can relate to him, and is a really good leader of men. And it like, you kind of see that same feel from Bo. Like, he's just a very, humble guy who is just kind of about the team and just wants to win. I think my initial reaction from that pick was just like a sigh of relief, almost like, we have a quarterback. And then hearing Peyton talk about it, it was like, okay, we've We have a quarterback now. We don't need him to do too much. We don't need him to be Patrick Mahomes. We don't need him to be Drew Brees. We just need him to be Bo Nix and execute the offense. That's it. And if he can do that, I think we'll be in a much better place than we were the last 8 years.
You're exactly right. Nowhere is that more evident than how Sean Payton felt about Russell Wilson. If you haven't heard it to this point, you haven't been paying attention. Russell Wilson was not a fit for Sean Payton's system, for Sean Payton's offense. We heard what Drew Brees said about how the offense looked last year, Pat. He said that it was unrecognizable. It was an unrecognizable Sean Payton offense. So anybody who wants to try and make the claim that Sean Payton didn't do enough for Russell Wilson, he did too much. He changed his system entirely. Are we to believe that Sean Payton would get completely away from his system just to spite Russ? No, he tried to do that to hold his hand through the year. And statistically, as we've discussed, it worked for Russell Wilson. Statistically, he was fine. But the eye test showed us that he did not do nearly enough of what he needed to do. He was not a fit in the system. He didn't run the offense. Enter Bo Nix. And one of the knocks against Nix, if you're someone who's still not completely sold on him, that's fine. That's absolutely fine because he hasn't stepped on the field yet. You shouldn't be sold on anybody. But something that will help you sell him or help you be sold on him is the fact that when he's at Oregon, he's running a specific offense, right, Pat? He was one of, if not the most prolific statistical quarterbacks that we have seen in college football. Now, granted, that doesn't always translate, okay? We've seen it time and time again that a dude will peak in college, he'll put up Star Wars numbers, fall completely flat in the NFL. But I think what Sean Payton saw in Bo Nix that maybe most turned him to the Bo Nix side, that got him aboard Bo Nix hype train, was the fact that if Bo Nix is put in a certain system, like he was at Oregon, he thrives. Sean Payton saw that. He said, I think this guy can run my system, and in my system, even in the NFL, he can thrive. Let's go to a comment really quick from our friend Marcus Boggins. Hottest show on YouTube, to be honest. You're absolutely right, Marcus. I usually disagree with everything that you say, but this is dead on. The fact that we coordinated White House, here's the best part. Patrick and I don't need to coordinate. We routinely find ourselves in situations where we dress similarly. We have the same level of swag. That was not planned. That was completely organic. Rocky, thank you so much for the comment. If we somehow manage to keep Williams, P. Ryan, Estime, I feel bad for defensive lines and backers. Hashtag bring the morphine. And we're going to get to Estime absolutely a little bit later. It's something that we are going to touch on. Any closing thoughts about Bo Nix? I mean, we could spend the whole show kind of talking about how Bo Nix is going to fit, but I like where I'm at right now, Pat, based on what we've heard, everything that we know about Bo Nix as an individual, like clearly he's a leader, clearly mentally he's ready to be an NFL quarterback. What else do you want to throw in?
Yeah, just a couple of last final things. You know, Bo over that last year, and yes, that's a very true point. Bo had 5 different coordinators during his college career. That's insane. If you think about just having 2 offensive coordinators with completely different systems, that's entirely new install. That's entirely new verbiage. That's entirely new huddle alignment. Everything. Plays, like all that stuff, that's completely different that you have to soak in and fully understand. And Bo showed throughout the process that he can get this information down quickly and efficiently and be able to execute it. I was listening to him talk in his presser and he talked about, how in his last year at Oregon, he was seeing certain defensive concepts that, teams would throw at him. And he's like, I've seen this for years at this point. Like, I know exactly how to react. I know exactly what to do in this situation. One of the biggest knocks on him is that he's this old prospect. Okay, yeah, that's fine. Add in COVID as your plus year. But I'm kind of starting to turn this tide of maybe it's good to have an experienced quarterback from college going into the NFL because maybe they understand the game a little bit more. And we saw Bo's progression from year 1 at Oregon to year 2, tied, and this is all NCAA, minimum 150 dropbacks, okay? Tied for second in all NCAA in turnover-worthy plays. That's second least amount of turnover-worthy plays. Tied for 10th in big time throws. Oh, I thought he only threw screens and bubbles, Mario. Oh, turns out he was a top 10 quarterback in college football for big time throws. Tied for second.
Hold on, Patrick.
Yes.
Everybody said that he was just he was a screenmonger. Everybody just said that it was the flats, it was bubble screens, it was halfback screens. Are you telling me that he actually throws the ball downfield effectively?
Yes, quite. And another note here, tied for second in the NCAA in drops. The second most drops from his wide receivers, least sacked quarterback in NCAA. He had the fifth lowest time to throw, and he was tied for second in least amount of interceptions, most touchdowns off of play action in college football. He was wildly efficient, 183 dropbacks off of play action, 23 touchdowns. That is great production. He's got huge hands. He's a sneaky good athlete, like Peyton talked about in the presser. I think that this is going to be a good marriage. Again, high character guy. Peyton really likes him. If he can just execute the offense and be a point guard, offense is going to look great.
And we heard it throughout this entire process. And there were more than one quarterbacks who said their most difficult meeting, like the most tedious thing that they had to put up with, was with the Broncos, was with Sean Payton, that he was grilling these guys. And now you see why. Now you get a sense as to why something like that happens. Like, clearly, this kind of due diligence was not done back in 2016 when the team drafted Paxton Lynch. Clearly, this kind of due diligence was not done in, 2019 when they drafted Drew Lock. These are the kind of things that you look for. And say what you will about Sean Payton. Like,
oh my God, can we stop with the Drew Lock Bo Nix comparison? Like, that is the most unbased argument I've ever heard in my entire life. It's literally just, oh, look at these two crackers. They look exactly the same. No, they're completely different quarterbacks by all means. So let's just squash that.
It's a lazy comparison. They did different things better. Bo Nix was better at more things than Drew Lock. I mean, I don't want to lay any credence to that whatsoever because it's just silly. I mean,
ridiculous.
The thing is with this whole process, like circling back to all of this, Sean Payton has gotten flags. It's like, oh yeah, he knows how to manage a quarterback. But then the people on the other side will say, well, he had Drew Brees for pretty much his entire career. It's like, yeah, that's true. He never had to develop a rookie quarterback. I think the only time he had a rookie quarterback actually start was Ian Book during the COVID year when Ian Book was like quarterback 5 or 6 on that roster. So even though he's never had to do it. Like let's look at this from the other side, Patrick. Maybe it's good that he had never done it. Because he probably never did it. He probably did more than he needed to throughout this whole process to really weed out some things. And honestly, if this quote unquote experiment works, if Bo Nix works and everything about him is what Sean Payton has said, I think you're going to see more and more teams start to take a similar approach as what Sean Payton did in terms of how intense the entire process was. So, again, hopefully everybody's excited for Bo Nix. Atomic 626, let me throw you up right here. I'm so excited for Bo and think he sounds too good to be true. The thing that scares me is he has not played hard defenses. That's the only criticism I can think of. Just real quick, okay? This past year, the Pac-12 was very good. There were a lot of better defenses. Maybe if he's coming from the Big 12, that's more of a discussion. But at the end of the day, Atomic, he's playing college defenses. You can say that about every single quarterback coming out except for maybe an SEC quarterback. But even the SEC guys, it's like there's college and then there's the pros. There's always a massive, very steep learning curve. So don't let that deter you because no quarterback that has ever been drafted ever played against the defense in college that is remotely on the same level as any given NFL defense.
Yeah, I mean, I think the closest comparison especially from this last season that we could make of like a college defense being near or around the same level as an NFL defense is Michigan. And that is like they had so many high level starters on that defense and still do, even with Harbaugh gone. That team is probably the best. Like that was the best defense in college football. And yeah, like you said, no college quarterback has ever played like truly hard defenses every single game. Like Patrick Mahomes played in the Big 12. Like there's no defense.
Patrick, he was throwing for 700 yards and 6 touchdowns routinely.
Yeah, the Oklahoma game. Like that's come on. Like it. Yes,
like he and Baker Mayfield combined for like 1,000 total yards in that game, over 10 touchdowns.
Yeah, it was nuts.
It was a video game.
The worst game that Bo had this year, graded by PFF, so take it with a grain of salt, was Utah. And Utah is a very good defense. That is one of the best defenses in college football. And he shred them up. It wasn't even close. I was scared going into that game as a Ducks fan. I was like, Utah has our number. And then by about the first half, by halftime, I think they were up 28-0 or something like that. But I was like, okay, we're good. It's fine. And that was the toughest defense that Bo had to face this year. He did very well against Washington, played very well against Utah, played really good against Oregon State, who also had a pretty good defense. And the game that he really struggled the most in was Texas Tech. But he still had a great game in that game. So I think for Bo, it's just more about the consistency. Can he carry over that consistency into the next level with Sean Payton? He's got so much time now. I'm really this is probably the most excited I've been for camp in a while, because we have a rookie quarterback. And he's probably he's going to be the smartest guy in the room. I can promise you, he's going to be the smartest guy in the room.
And Utah defenses, Patrick, that was a great segue. Yeah. The Broncos' third round pick.
There we go.
Jonah Ellis, the edge rusher. So, quick little story if you didn't hear it. The Broncos were prepared to trade back. George Payton, I think might be feeling himself a little bit, Patrick. George Payton cracked a little bit of a joke. He got a little bit cheeky when they were doing his interview with Sean Payton. He's talking about how they had a trade in place because Sean Payton doesn't like to trade back, right? We saw in his first draft with us last year, traded up a couple times, moved around, got the guys that he wanted. Mm-hmm. They joked about how everything was set. They were ready to move back and trade back, add a few more picks later in the draft, unless this guy fell to them, and that's Jonah Ellis. So again, I'm going to give you my knee-jerk reaction and then kind of where I'm at now that I've been able to process it a little bit, watch some more film on this guy. The pick when it was made surprised me. Not because Jonah Ellis isn't a good edge rusher, because he is, and I think he's going to mesh really well in that room. It surprised me because in terms of need, to me, edge is not a big need. I think Baron Browning is going to have a breakout season. We saw a little bit of a breakout season from Jonathan Cooper last year, and that's a guy that's gotten better every single year. Nick Bonito really took a huge leap from year 1 to year 2, and you hope that continues, that trajectory continues. So in terms of the edge room, it's like they're young, but they have a lot of untapped potential. So to me, I'm thinking, why aren't you getting a cornerback to play opposite of Pat Surtain? Why aren't you beefing up the defensive line? Why aren't you maybe taking a receiver at that point to give Bo Nix a weapon? And speaking of that, I know it was considered that they were taking Franklin there, and people got mad that they didn't take Franklin, ended up getting him later. Again, we'll discuss that here in a minute. But the more that I read about Jonah Ellis and the more that I watch him, he's just a naturally gifted pass rusher. He has great moves. He has a lot in his arsenal. The only downside is he's not the biggest guy. You hope that he can put some mass on. He's not going to overwhelm NFL offensive tackles, right? He's not going to bull rush. He's not too terribly long for an edge rusher for a guy his size, but he is incredibly technically sound. And you want to talk about how smart Bo Nix is as a quarterback. Jonah Ellis is incredibly intelligent as an edge rusher. They called him the mayor of Sack Lake City while he was in Utah. 13 sacks in, I think, 10 or 11 games last season. Yeah. And this is going to be a trend as we're talking about picks, Pat. They drafted production. Bo Nix is one of the most productive college quarterbacks. They drafted him. Jonah Ellis was crazy productive last year. They drafted him. Franklin, who we're going to get to in a second, incredibly productive. That was the theme of this draft. So I know you're an edge rush guy.
Yeah.
That's where you get your jollies, right? Tell me about Jonah Ellis. Why should we be so excited about him?
First of all, Broncos legacy player. His dad played for the Broncos in I believe it was the early 2000s. And I mean, this is a guy who has a similar athletic profile to Von Miller. Obviously Von Miller was a very explosive edge rusher. He was a good run defender. I'd say like one of the bigger knocks on Ellis is like he's got to be better in the run game, which is fine. But like you said, 13 sacks, 39 pressures on the year. I mean, that's a really high rate of pressure to sack. So I think this is just a way for them to maybe like bolster the room. That's their insurance policy for, we said that again about Zach Wilson a couple weeks ago, but this is like the insurance policy for life after Jonathan Cooper or Baron Browning. And I think this also kind of points to maybe Drew Sanders staying inside and maybe not being the edge rusher that George Paton said he was going to be. So, I mean, this is really more just about finding somebody who can get to the quarterback and get home, because that was such a pain point last year. Obviously, the trade for John Franklin Myers kind of changed our need for interior defensive line. Like that was a really good get for them, really great value. And then sign him to that extension was fantastic. But for Ellis specifically, this is a guy who played in a really, really good defensive scheme. And his numbers just increased. The more snaps he got, the more productive he got. So in 2022, he had 4 sacks on 24 pressures, 20 hurries. That's really good production, right? And then you fast forward to this last season, 39 pressures, 24 hurries, 13 sacks. Again, just insane production. And that is definitely what the Broncos were going after with this pick. I think that this is a guy who can continue to grow into a reliable edge rusher, just as long as he puts on a little bit more size, and B, gets that run defense down a little bit more. Somebody said, which one of you can squat the most? I think we all know the answer to that question.
If any of you have ever seen my backside, I wake out of bed. Yeah. I wake up and what do I do out of bed? I get out of bed squatting more than Patrick. Okay,
that's false. That is cap. Absolute cap.
Now you don't want to go down. I will hip thrust you to the moon.
Let's put the hip thrust vids. Let's put the hip thrust vids up. How I sent you to the moon. Launched you.
Said you to take us all the way to the moon. The next pick, which by and large, Pat, was very, very well received by Broncos country, because a lot of the fans, I will get to you. You will have your chance. I know how you feel about this. A lot of fans were really excited because when you're talking about Troy Franklin, when they were talking about Troy Franklin, he was projected late first, early second round pick, maybe a guy that the Bills are interested in, having lost Diggs. Maybe he sneaks somewhere into the middle of the second round. And when the Broncos did not take him with the 76th pick and they instead went with Jonah Ellis, I think a lot of fans were surprised, and I know a lot of them were actually mad because they like Troy Franklin. If you're looking at the rankings, he was falling. There were arguably worse receivers going before him, depending on who you ask, if you're going off of certain rankings. And they end up trading up into I think it was the first pick of the 4th round to take Troy Franklin. You got Bo Nix's favorite target from college back. Again, huge production, a ton of yards, a ton of touchdowns. I don't have the stats in front of me. I'm sure that you have them pulled up somewhere. But bottom line is, like we said, this draft was all about production. This team, all they did was go out and they got dudes who produced pillar to post. And that's what Troy Franklin did. Now, the conversations that Pat and I had behind the scenes were a little bit different. Pat, I know you got killed a little bit for this on Twitter, Franklin was not necessarily your favorite pick of the draft.
Yeah. No, he wasn't. And the reason was because I'm thinking of it from the coach standpoint, right? Like I'm looking at the guys who are in the room right now. And then you're trading up for this guy. I do not, let me be perfectly clear. Okay. I like Troy Franklin as a player. I am a Ducks fan. I have watched Troy Franklin with Bo Nix for 2 years. Okay. Troy Franklin, great deep threat. Probably one of the better deep threats in this class. But when you look at it from that coaching aspect, what position is he going to play in this offense? Marvin Mims is the starting Z. Cortland Sutton, for now, is the starting X. Troy Franklin doesn't have the size to play X in this offense. He doesn't. And if you don't understand what that means, an X in Sean Payton's offense needs to be a bigger body, a more physical, willing run blocker as a receiver, and someone who can operate very well with contested catches from about from the line of scrimmage to about 10 yards, and then someone who can win deep, okay, with contested catches. I didn't see that with Troy Franklin. I didn't see him being an X in this offense. And lo and behold, I got absolutely thrashed for that on Twitter because I said, I don't see the fit right now because who is he going to take snaps from? And people came at me and said, well, he can play everything. I had someone say in the comments that he could be a Y. I was like, do you even know what a fucking Y is? That's a tight end, you idiot. That's an inline tight end. He's not going to play the X. And then how vindicated I felt when Sean Payton in the presser said, yeah, we see him as an outside Z. I said, okay, that's perfect. Use him as an outside Z because that's where he would fit the most, right? You go into 11 personnel, you've got Sutton, Patrick Reynolds as your X's, maybe even a little Jordan. Okay. You've got
a little Brandon Johnson action.
I see Brandon Johnson as a Z personally. I love Brandon Johnson as a Z. You've got Johnson and Franklin as your Z's, and then you've got Mims as your F, your flanker, right? I didn't love the trade up for him. Yes, he's productive. 77 catches, over 1,300 yards, the most in this class for minimum 100 targets. And then 14 touchdowns, he was second to Malik Washington in yards, but tied for first in touchdowns with Marvin Harrison Jr. and Malik Neighbors, one more than Rome Odunze, right? The problem is he's not a physical enough receiver. He doesn't block very well at all. He's got a very slight frame. Not like Peyton said that he was quick in and out of his breaks. He might have been at the pro day, but on film, he really wasn't. And then there's just some.
He really just ran by guys in college.
Yeah, like absolutely like speed, blazing speed, which is great. That's fantastic. And then yes, pairing him with Bo Nix is an absolute home run. The value was great. I just didn't love the pick. And I didn't love trading up for him. Like that's my biggest thing is you're trading up for a guy who has all these very obvious limitations on film. And to all the people who are like, well, so he can't get better in the NFL. Read the fucking tweet again, my dude. Like just because I don't agree with the pick right away. And I don't agree with the fact that he doesn't exactly fit the offense as it stands, doesn't mean I don't like the guy or I don't like the player. I love him. I'm a Ducks
We're
guy.
not entitled to an opinion, Patrick. Really quick, let's take a look at what Rocky is asking. Would Franklin be number 3 or does he beat out Tim? We're going to know more when they get on the field. But I will say this. If Tim Patrick is able to make a full recovery, if we see shades of 2021 Tim Patrick, pre-injury Tim Patrick, and again, that's a big ask. If anybody can do it, Tim Patrick has done it. He overcame a much more gruesome injury when he was in college, and he had several, and he went on to become what he has become. If you are getting that production out of Tim Patrick, no, Franklin is not beating him out, especially like you're talking about, Patrick. Tim is a fantastic blocker.
Oh,
Tim is probably the best blocking wide receiver on this team. Lil Jordan Humphrey, fantastic blocker. Cortland Sutton, very good blocker.
Very good.
Reynolds, very good blocker. This is the theme. Are they going to ask Franklin to block? They shouldn't, and I hope that they don't. And Rocky asks, is he a screen guy? Yeah, I mean, really at this level, the screen depends so much on how you're setting it up, if you're allowing your blocks to set up, if it's called at the right time. I mean, he could be a screen guy simply for the fact that he's really fast, right? Like, you could make that argument, but would you rather have him catching screens or Marvin Mims Jr.? Would you rather throw a running back screen to one of these running backs? Like, that's the question. I don't think it's fair to kind of like put him in a bubble, no pun intended, to only be a screen guy. It's like you don't draft a wide receiver to be a screen guy. You draft a wide receiver to run routes and be a wide receiver. Will they use him in the screen game? I'm sure. Will they manufacture targets for him? Yeah, probably, the way that they did early on with Marvin Mims. I think it'll be similar, but I don't think that you're really going to see the ceiling of a Troy Franklin until maybe his second or third year in the league.
I don't see him being used as a screen guy. He got 18 targets behind the line of scrimmage this last season. Not as, not the best area, but like he got 39 targets in the short range of the field. So, I mean, we're talking hitches, quick stops, flats, that kind of stuff. Where he's going to make his money is in the middle of the field. If he can become a intermediate pass catcher, that's where he's going to make a ton of his money. 32 targets over the middle of the field, and 22 of those were catches. And then obviously the deep threat. He got 24 targets last year, 14 catches in the deep part of the field. That's going to be where he's going to make the most of his money. He's just really got it. Like, he had 3, 5, 6, 7, 9 drops last season. That's, you want to see that. You want to see a guy who has his size. He's very slender. This goes back to my tweet. He's very slender. And when you're that slender of a receiver, you have to have strong hands. You have to be able to play through contact and catch the ball. Quite a few games. Go back and watch the Washington game last year and watch watch a couple of his drops in that game. It was really frustrating. It was frustrating for me as a Ducks fan to see that happen. But I'm like, man, you got to catch that ball. That's 100%. Like, you have to be able to catch those balls. So screen guy, not so much. Intermediate deep guy, absolutely. Some of those longer concepts that Peyton loves to call, he'll be absolute money. He called Mills quite a bit last year. That would be a concept where Bo Nix and Troy Franklin could absolutely dominate.
Absolutely. Fast forward to the 5th round. 2 picks in this 5th round, Patrick. The first one, and maybe my favorite pick of this draft. This is a guy that I was really high on. I thought he'd go a couple rounds sooner. It was a need that I think they needed to address, and it's Chris Abrams-Drain out of Missouri, the cornerback.
Oh, man.
The number 2 cornerback position is very much up in the air in Denver, and it is going to be a dogfight, right? Mm-hmm. You don't really know what you have in Riley Moss. Damari Mathis showed a lot of promise his rookie year, fell off a cliff last year. Is he able to rekindle some of that? Like, we saw flashes his rookie year. And for a guy like Nick Bonito, who trended in the right direction, Damari Mathis very much trended in the opposite direction. Levi Wallace was signed. Wallace is good. He's a Moreau type, like who they had last year. He's a guy. I don't think he's necessarily going to wow you. He's not going to jump off. He'll make plays. But are you completely confident in a guy like that to be opposite of Pat Surtain? Because opposing offenses are going to go away from Patrick Surtain. Enter Chris Abrams-Drain, who, as a 5th round pick, I would be surprised if he started this year, pending injury. but he's got that dog in him. He's an undersized corner, but he plays much bigger than he is. He's actually surprisingly good in run support given his size. And he will sticks to the defending receiver. Excellent footwork, great speed, great recovery. I was really excited about this pick because it was a player that I really liked, and it was a need that I really thought needed to be addressed.
Yeah, 28 pass breakups over his college career, and the majority of those came in his 3 years as a true starter. 7 picks in his career, allowed a 76.8 passer rating, but this last year allowed 56.8. I mean, he's undersized, but he's got really good ball skills, really good instincts. Like you said, he's able to come down and play the run. Maybe they use him a little, as an inside out guy, but I mean, this is a dude that you can have matched up against someone like an Xavier Worthy. Go back and look at him play against Malik Neighbors, and you can see the type of player that he is. And he's a lot like my co-host, Chris Harris Jr., in that, undersized, maybe
comp.
a little underappreciated, but just fights and fights and fights. And you can see that in his tape. The pass breakups is huge. He had 10 pass breakups this year. That's a really, really good indicator of how well he can play the pass. 624 snaps outside, only 64 snaps inside. So perhaps he puts on a little bit of size at the NFL level. Let's hope he doesn't lose any of that speed. But I really thought that this was a great pick for them, a really, really good value pick to get him in the 5th round. I was a little disappointed that they didn't get Kyrie Jackson. And that was the other thing that I wanted to say about Troy Franklin is I at that point, I was like, oh, we're getting Kyrie Jackson. Like, that's a dude that you could absolutely put as a starter across from Pat Surtain, the Alabama transfer. So I was a little sad when they didn't get him, but getting Chris Abrams-Drain, I was like, okay, that's a good, that's a good backup plan. So I'm pretty excited to see what he can do.
2 picks later, the Broncos drafted the Golden Domer, Audric Estime, and I was excited about this pick. I was excited where they got it. I'm not a big believer in drafting running backs high unless they're a Jahmyr Gibbs type, a Bijan Robinson type, like what we saw last year. Yeah. Outside of those guys, man, where they're it's almost disrespectful to only call them a running back. Outside of guys like that, these are the kind of guys that you want. And this is exactly around the time that you want to start drafting running backs. Now, you and I had actually talked about Estime before he got drafted here from purely a dynasty fantasy football standpoint. And I told you that his 40 really scared me because it was like historically low. I went back and I crunched the numbers. There was no running back historically who had run slower than a 4.69, like outside of the 4.6 range, who has had a prolonged successful career. That's not to say that it's not possible. And then
Kyron Williams.
Here's the thing. And I also listen. We also watched his film, okay? And I started watching more of his film after he got drafted. Obviously, I have no idea how he only ran a 4.71 at the combine because his film is faster than that. Now, he's not a breakaway guy. He's not a Jalen Wright type who's just going to run away from defenses. You're never going to get one of these really long runs unless he has to break a bunch of tackles along the way, right? Yeah. But in terms of what he does well, fantastic vision. Really, really good vision. He has the things that you wish Javonte had more of. Javonte is such a violent runner, but his vision just leaves a little bit to be desired. The reason that Estime pops on film and looks so much faster and quicker than he is because of his vision, is because of his burst, and he is so unbelievably difficult to take down. If you take a look at this guy, and I think he's only 20 years old,
he's a tank.
He's built like an edge rusher. He is a monster. Yeah. This is the kind of guy that defenses hate tackling for an entire game. So I love this pick. It kind of makes you wonder what the future of Javonte Williams is going to feel like. This is his contract year.
Yeah.
We all know that Javonte struggled last season. He was obviously still recuperating from that injury. Probably should have started on the injured list, but what's done is done.
Yeah.
This felt like a move where if Javonte struggles again, they can feel good about not re-signing him. And honestly, like regardless, unless Javonte has a monster year, I don't know if they do re-sign him because now the Broncos have leverage in the running back room in the form of Audric Estime, who really is similar to Javonte. I wouldn't necessarily say that he has the burst that Javonte did coming out of college. We don't see the game breaking, like the highlight reel worthy broken tackles. But Estime is just a really hard runner, tough dude to bring down. Seems like he'll fit perfectly in this Sean Payton offense.
Well, this is a dude that, absolute tank. Like I think Braylon Allen was one of the guys that I was watching for in this class. Another guy who's 20 years old. Man, I had no idea that Estime was still just 20. But I'm going to give some credit here. Shout out to Boggins for putting me on, because that was a home run pick for them, right? No one in college football had more yards after contact than Audric Estime. Only 3 running backs in college football had more missed tackles forced than Audric Estime. And those 3 names, Mario, Frank Gore Jr., Imani Bailey, and Kamani Vidal. Just 3. Those 3 guys. And for Sean Payton specifically, I'm happy, because this is pointing back to us going to just power football, run the rock down their throats. He had 121 attempts in gap scheme runs. Last season, the Broncos ran more zone than they ran gap. I was sitting here like, what are they doing? Historically speaking, Sean Payton has been a gap over zone guy. But this kind of speaks to them maybe going back to some of that power run game. You have guys in the room now like Javonte who could probably benefit from going back to a gap primary run scheme. You've got Pirine, who might be gone, but another guy, gap run scheme. Estime, gap run scheme. Like, go back to it. Pound the rock. And with Bo Nix now, got to have the run game. Got to give your rookie quarterback some time. What better way to do it than with an absolute hoss? The vision is fantastic. A guy his size should not be able to move so nimbly-bimbly from side to side the way that he does. And he's a good run blocker, or pass blocker, excuse me. And he's not a bad receiver out of the backfield either. So there's a lot of upside here. Again, great value pick. A lot of people are hating on the Broncos draft class, and I think that this was actually a very productive draft class for them. Also, Mario, only one player in college football had more touchdowns than Audric Estime last year. That was Blake Corum. That was it. Kyrie Robinson from San Jose State had the same amount.
Production. This is the theme of their draft, Patrick. This is what we keep saying. They drafted guys that produced at the college level, and they're hoping that it translates.
4.27.
Fast forward to the 7th round.
4.27 yards after contact per attempt. Attempt. That's
absurd.
Insane. Can't wait.
That's insane. And you could make the argument that he hasn't even really fully grown into his body yet. You can make the argument that he doesn't quite have his grown man body yet, which means that he could theoretically add more muscle, add more mass, and become even more explosive than he even is. So fast forward to the 7th round. I was going to say it. This pick was objectively hilarious. Not because I dislike it, not because there was necessarily anything wrong with it, but Devon Vele, okay? Yeah. Had never heard of him, and I like to think that I do a lot of draft prep. I mean, you and I talk almost daily, and leading up to the draft, I feel like we touched on damn near every single solitary prospect that we thought was in the range of the Denver Broncos. Like every guy that they drafted, you and I had discussed. Now it's the 7th round, so it is what it is. But let me tell everybody, in case you're unaware, what is objectively hilarious to me about Vele. First of all, 3-year mission as a Mormon, if I'm not mistaken, which means he did not start playing college football until 3 years after he graduated high school. As soon as he went to Utah, I don't think he had a catch his freshman year. Sophomore year, I think he had a couple. And then he was moderately productive his last 2 years. And then his 5th year, he had decent numbers. So it doesn't necessarily fit with our production theme that we put out. He did produce, but certainly not to the extent that like a lot of guys who did that were still available at that point. But he's 6'4", 100 or 217, 220 pounds, whatever he is, went to Utah, 26 years old. He's Tim Patrick. He's basically Tim Patrick, and they're the same age. Now, if I'm not mistaken, Patrick, he's going to be 27 by the time that he takes his very first NFL snap as a rookie.
Yeah. I mean, he is Tim Patrick. Sean Payton said that in the press conference. He's very much like Tim Patrick. This is a guy who's just a big vertical winner. He's got some speed on him. He's not going to be this elite receiver. That's the biggest thing. This is a dude that they're bringing in who is going to be a special teams guy. He's going to be maybe he's going to be a specific use unicorn type of receiver. But he's a really, really good run blocker. That is, again, look at the type of players that Sean Payton is targeting in this year. You target a guy like Josh Reynolds. Why would we sign a guy like Josh Reynolds? Well, he's one of the better run blocking receivers in the league. That's why. There's a reason Tim Patrick is still around. He's one of the better run blocking receivers. There's a reason that they haven't traded Cortland Sutton yet. He's a good run blocking receiver. You get where I'm going with this? Do you see what I'm doing here?
Sean Payton has a type. Patrick Chiodi has a type. It's big booty women who have tattoos. That's Patrick's type. I have a type. It's big boobed blondes. Okay? We have types. Sean Payton has a type, and Sean Payton's type is wide receivers who can block.
Over his 5 years at Utah, okay, and specifically over his last 3 years, okay, his average depth of target, 20.1 in 2021, 11.6 in 22, 11.8 in 23. This is a downfield target. This is a guy who you can get off of play action. He's going to win contested catches. I like this pick because it's just a late pick. Are we going to argue about this guy? No, but if he makes the team, that's the type of player that Sean Payton wants. He wants a receiver who's going to win deep, who's going to block his ass off and catch the ball when he's supposed to. No block, no rock. I can't stand receivers who just want the ball in their hands, but don't want to do any of the dirty work. And then when you're in a run heavy offense and you got to block, those play action calls hit like crack because you're like, man, I'm going to fake this block and I'm going to run deep and I got to win because I'm probably going to have a guy on my hip, maybe someone over the top of me. Deshaun Vele can win in those situations. He showed it plenty of times at Utah that he can win deep and be just a solid downfield threat. And he'll probably be a special teamer as well. Count him in for special teams. I love it.
I really want to see a 5 wide receiver set where Franklin and Mims are on the bench, which means that your smallest receiver in this 5 wide set would be Brandon Johnson at 6'2", 210, whatever he is. That's what I would love to see, just for the sheer comedy of it. Yeah. Last pick for the Denver Broncos, and the guy that should have been Mr. Irrelevant, but of course there was like a weird pick after that. Like it's supposed to be 256. So for my money, Nick Gargiulo is absolutely Mr. Irrelevant because Mr. Irrelevant is pick 256. I don't want to argue semantics. That's my Mr. Irrelevant. And really, all I got to say about this guy, aside from the fact that he was number 69 for the Cox, and I mean, that's a win right then and there in itself.
You could not wait to say that, couldn't you? You just.
I've been waiting the whole damn show to talk about number 69 from the Cox. No, but honestly, man, the thing that I like best about him, first of all, he started off at Yale. So you know that he is intelligent. You know that he is smart. You know that you could probably give him a lot to handle, and he's going to understand the mental aspect of it. I also like how he played basically every position along the offensive line. Now, he started off at left tackle, struggled, wasn't great, which is a little bit of a red flag when you're playing for Yale if you're not, kind of head and shoulders above the competition you're going up against. Moved inside, had a lot more success, played a little bit of center, a little bit of guard, and this strikes me as just like a really good puzzle piece. Will he make the team? Maybe. Definitely a practice squad guy at the very least, but you love how you're able to move him all around. And to me, it's like, this is exactly the kind of pick that you should be making at this point in the draft. You find an offensive lineman. He's been there, done that. He's played in a lot of different systems. He's had a modicum of success, but he can play pretty much every position. And that's what you're looking for. Like, if a player goes down, how comfortable do you feel with the guys who are on the roster behind him? Someone like him, because he can play multiple positions, you feel like maybe you don't have to carry as many offensive linemen if he's able to make that jump and show that he can hang with the big boys. Again, probably not making the starting 53, and that's okay. He's definitely definitely going to be a practice squad player, and it is what he is.
I think his best case scenario is that he competes with Sam Mustipher for the backup center role. Also, this, just everybody who's watching, Alex Forsyth is going to be the starting center for the Denver Broncos. That, put that in the board right now. I'm not even joking. That is a very serious thing. Alex Forsyth is going to be the starting center. If you haven't put that puzzle piece together since they drafted Bo Nix, I don't know what to tell you. You're just blind. Like you said, this is a guy who has position for. He played guard for the first 5 games of last season, and then finished the season for the Gamecocks at center. So he can play center, he can play guard. He's a big dude, 6'5", 320 plus. Zach Strief is just licking his chops for this guy, and that's when they signed Sam Mustipher, it was like, okay, what's the plan here? This might be the plan.
Contingency plan, backup plan. Yeah. If Forsyth doesn't show them what they expect to see in camp,
which
then you can fall back on a guy like Mustipher, he's not that exciting. It's like he doesn't excel that much. He's a huge drop off from what you had last year in Lloyd Cushenberry, but he's a guy. You can feel comfortable enough putting him in for a game or two and feel like the production isn't going to drop off a cliff. That's what Mustipher was.
Yeah.
But Forsyth, you're absolutely right. He's basically slotted to be the starting center for the Broncos in 2024.
Smart, instinctual player, really, really good. They got him in a really, really great value last year. This is Gargiulo is another guy that could probably be a very similar type of player. You need players with position versatility. And that's exactly what Gargiulo provides. So is he going to be a guard? Is he going to be a center? I think we'll see him do a little bit of both in the preseason and just get a feel. But man, he's really good in those power schemes. And hey, we just talked about it with Estime. That's where Sean Payton wants to get back to. So let's get back to it. Let's get back to some nasty football. I'm ready to see some bodies.
Play some bully ball.
I'm ready to see bodies.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, obviously, the draft didn't necessarily end there. We had a handful of undrafted free agent signings. I want to talk about the 4 that I'm most excited about personally, okay?
Yeah.
And it pains me to say this first one because he's a Nebraska Cornhusker, but give credit where credit is due. I thought Omar Brown was a fantastic signing. I was surprised that he did not get drafted. I actually had him projected as somewhere in the 6th round. So to me, this is a lot of value, and you could tell the Broncos were very high on him because they gave him 250,000 guaranteed to sign to their practice squad, which was tied with the most with Blake Watson and Frank Crum, the other guys that we want to discuss. Omar Brown is another great chess piece. I know he played in the box a lot. I think he's technically listed as a safety. I think he played in the slot as well. Slot, box. I mean, he played all over. So he's just a really versatile tool that you could have on your defense. Is Vance Joseph able to tap into the potential of these kind of chess pieces who, they're a defensive back that don't even necessarily have a true position? Scares me a little bit based on what Vance Joseph did or didn't do in Arizona. But again, it's an undrafted free agent. And if we're talking about a guy that has a good chance to make this team as a UDFA, Brown's probably that guy, Pat. Yeah. Just because of his versatility, his ability to do multiple things, going to be a special teamer. He's at the top of my list. And then the other guy that I really wanted to touch on here, Blake Watson. Another running back. Like this, when the draft started winding down, and you saw some teams take some running backs that you maybe hadn't really heard of or didn't really know that much about. You can make the case that they were drafted to be kick returners with the new kick return rules. Maybe these teams wanted to find a guy because they felt like that could be a really big part of their offense as the special teams. But it made no sense why some of these guys were drafted before Blake Watson. It was shocking to me. In fact, when I saw that we signed him, I had to go back and double check that he wasn't actually drafted because I couldn't believe that he wasn't drafted. Yeah. There were reports that the Broncos were really high on Jalen Wright. Obviously, you don't love investing in a third-round quarterback, especially when you have the limited picks that the Broncos had in this draft. That's where Jalen Wright went. Yeah. If you want a Jalen Wright substitute, if you want a Jalen Wright Kroger brand, Kirkland brand, then that's Blake Watson. The dude has electricity coming out of his legs. For everything that we said that Andre Estime can't do, Blake Watson does. Yeah. In fact, he is so good and is such a good pass catcher and is such a good pass blocker. He might challenge Jaleel McLaughlin for a roster spot. Now, he's not as explosive as McLaughlin because very few people are. He doesn't have the burst that McLaughlin does in that immediate uptick where he can go 0 to 60. But the biggest flaw in Jaleel McLaughlin's game is his pass protection. He is a liability in pass pro. In fact, if you have Jaleel McLaughlin in the game, he's not pass blocking. He is a complete liability out there. Through really no fault of his own. Like, he's a very diminutive person, right? And I think he's like about the same weight as Zach Seegers. That should scare you a little bit in pass pro. With Blake Watson, he is a really, really good pass blocker. And when you're in the NFL, Pat, if you want to be on the field on third down, you damn sure better be able to protect your quarterback as a running back. I love this Blake Watson signing, and there's a reason that he got $250,000. He and Brown, to me, are the most likely guys to make the 53, which would be fantastic for Watson because that's a really crowded running back room.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing with Watson is the reason that he dropped out of the draft completely, I think, is because of the injury that he suffered at the Senior Bowl. Unfortunate that really took him out because he's a fantastic player. But the choice routes that he can run out of the backfield, that's the big draw for a guy like Blake Watson. And that's the biggest draw for Sean Payton when he's looking at running backs is who can I trust to run routes and understand how to attack defenses and be on the same page with my quarterback. And that would be Blake Watson. He showed that at the Senior Bowl. He was leaving defenders in the dust, really sharp, violent cuts and really solid hands. So he got better as a pass protector. I wouldn't call him an elite pass protector, but he's good for his size. And I think that's going to be a fun camp battle to watch. Who knows? Javonte Williams might not even be on this roster when the 53 gets announced. Samaje Perine might not even be on this roster when the 53 is announced. Jaleel McLaughlin might find himself out of a job. if Blake Watson comes into camp.
There's a guy that's going to be the odd man out, Patrick. One of these backs is going to be the odd man out.
I'd say two of them. Two of the running backs that are on the roster right now will not be on the roster. Or two of the running backs who were on the roster last year on the 53 will not be
on the 53. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad Rocky asked about Frank Crum.
I gotta watch. I gotta watch a little bit more of him.
So there were three guys who got
6'7", 315. My goodness, massive.
And this is that kind of seems to be their theme for the offensive line, right? Like they just want big, massive, nasty dudes. So I'm with you. I haven't been able to dig into Frank Crum too much. There's not a ton on him, but the Broncos thought highly enough. They thought highly enough of him to give him $250,000. So along with Watson and Brown, they got the most out of all their undrafted free agent signings. I'll just run through it really quick. Jordan Miller, quarterback. Actually, I don't want to look all that up. If you guys want to know how much they got, you go ahead. I'm not wasting time doing it. One other guy that I wanted to mention, and then I know someone that you wanted to discuss a little bit afterwards, the tight end Thomas Yasmin from Utah, surprisingly only got $47,000, but I saw some of his tape and I looked into him a little bit. I really like his game. And you know what? He might be a dark horse candidate, Pat, to make this roster just based on where the tight end position is. Now, as a Bronco fan, you hope and you pray that Greg Dulcich can stay on the field, that his hamstrings hold up, and that he is able to get healthy, stay healthy, and become the pass-catching tight end they drafted him to be and that they hope him to be. But you cannot put all of your eggs in that basket. Outside of that, you don't really have a pass-catching threat. You have a couple guys who maybe could turn into something, and Yasmin, honestly, is one of those guys. He's a big, physical tight end. He is not bad at inline blocking from what I can tell. He's good like after the catch, running with the ball in his hands. He seems like he can high point the football. He's an above average receiver from the tight end perspective. And like I said, I think he's a real dark horse candidate to potentially make this team, really based solely on the fact that this was such a terrible position from an offensive standpoint last year. The Broncos got little to no production from their tight ends. A lot of that obviously due to the Dulcich injury. But if you look at all of the top teams, like the last 8 teams remaining in the playoffs last year, they had pass-catching tight ends. They had that safety net. And that position all of a sudden becomes much more important, Pat, with a rookie quarterback. Who is going to be your safety net? Right. It has to be a tight end. Maybe Yasmin could be that guy. The last person that you wanted to touch on, who you have a little bit of history with, wide receiver Lincoln Victor out of, I don't know where he went.
Washington State.
Wazoo.
Yeah. So real quick on Yasmin, this guy has a rugby background, athlete. He's big, 6'5", 250. Not a lot of production with the receiving part, only 28 targets over his college career, 19 catches, but 5 of them were touchdowns. That's big. So this guy can produce after the catch. He had 69 yards after the catch this last season, 150 last season. Nice.
69.
Nice. But Lincoln Victor. So this is a kid who he's from the Vancouver, Washington area. He played at Union High School in.
He's Canadian.
No. He played at Union High School,
Vancouver,
which is around Camas, Washington. And then he went on to play at Washington State. Really grew into a receiver. He's smaller size, but he's a gadget guy. And we know how Sean Payton loves gadget guys. He really came into his own at Washington State over the last couple of years, playing on special teams and then being a really good guy after the catch. I watched this kid in high school. I coached against him in high school. I think that it's going to be really, really tough for him to break this roster. But I think if Sean wants to keep him on, if Sean wants to keep him around, he'll probably be a practice squad guy, but he could have a lot of upside as a slot receiver and as a special teamer, return specialist. I think that it's really fun to see kids who, you've coached against or you've coached get to this level. Them getting to the college level is insane, but them getting to this level is even crazier. Super excited for Link. I hope that he has a great camp and that he shows out and maybe earns his way onto this squad somehow, some way. But it's definitely a long shot. But go watch some of his tape, man. He's a really fun player to watch, and especially his growth over the last 2 seasons has been really cool to see.
Absolutely. One thing that I want to leave everybody with, and something that Pat and I made a very diligent effort to not do, was hand out grades.
No,
because if we're being completely honest, handing out draft grades
stupid
based on your own pre-existing conception of how these guys are, how good you think that they are, it's completely arbitrary.
Uh-oh. You're frozen. What away? Well, it's just me in the show now. As Mario is frozen, yes, we're not going to give out draft grades. Draft grades are stupid. Draft grades are dumb because you don't really know what these guys are going to be until like 2-3 years into their career. Then you can go back and trade. Yeah, exactly, Rocky. Draft grades don't work out for 3 to 4 years anyways. Yeah, and that's the best way to think about it. You can't really grade something when they've never even played a snap in the NFL. Somebody posted the little blurb of Patrick Mahomes' draft grade right after the Chiefs drafted him, and they gave him a C-. They gave Patrick Mahomes a C- as a draft grade. That just goes to show that it's not that draft grades don't mean anything. So as Mario tries to get his situation figured out, there we go. Jeez.
Yo, I apologize. My computer just straight up turned off. No idea why, but I'm back. We're going to close this out. Let me go ahead and circle back. I'm going to get my thoughts out.
I already did it. You don't need to do it.
It's stupid. It's dumb. It's lazy. All the above, Patrick. You and I strive to give people really good content that they otherwise can't get anywhere else. And aside from the fact that, we're very handsome and really buff, which, no other podcasters are. Like, no podcasters are built like us, but that's really beside the point. I kind of want it. Like, I would pat myself on the back, but I just can't get my hand quite back that far. Yeah. It's lap boy problems. If you know, then you know. We don't want to give out grades because we want to give you an opportunity to develop your own opinion about a player. We want to give you the opportunity to actually see them play. So a word to all of the wise watching us. If you are listening to or taking in content where they are handing out draft grades before any of these young men have a chance to strap up their cleats and step onto an NFL field, that's the wrong content for you. Unless you like shitty content, then keep watching that content. We don't do grades here. We tell you about the prospects, we tell you about their fits, and we tell you why we think they're going to be good because we know our shit. And that's exactly why you should listen to us. Any housekeeping things before we get out of here, Patrick? I got an Avalanche game to watch.
Yeah, nothing left. Draft grades are dumb. Don't do them. That's stupid. Go Avs. Congratulations to the Nuggets for moving on. Thank you for beating the Lakers. And yeah, let's go Avs.
If you want to follow us on Twitter, and I promise you do because we are delightful, at Batanzi Therapy, what's your at Patrick Quixote. If you like this incredible shirt, Run the Damn Ball, or you like shirts that look homemade by a fan, which is basically what my store is, make sure you check out altitudeadjustmentshop.com. And if I may say one more thing, Patrick, I believe.
Oh my
Thank you all so much for watching. We love you. Goodbye. See you next week.
See you next week.